Recorded. It's too late. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Conway. I am the Public Assistance Officer for Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. We are here for an applicant briefing for disaster 4641. And I am going to, all right. Hey, can everybody see the screen with the slideshow on it?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So we're here for the DR 4641 applicant briefing. DR 4641 has an incident period of December 15th, 2021. It was signed by the President on February 23rd, 2022 for severe storms and straight line winds for the 25 counties that are listed here. This is a map of the, declared counties. It's mostly south and east Nebraska, southeast and east Nebraska. There's a big windstorm derecho that spun off several tornadoes that went through a large portion of the state and caused some significant damage for several entities. For those of you who are new to public assistance, the FEMA Public Assistance Program is a grant program designed to reimburse eligible applicants who have sustained damages or costs related to the response and recovery from incidents as declared under the authority of the Stafford Act. Eligible public assistance projects are typically paid out with a 75% federal share of eligible obligated costs. Public assistance is for damages to public infrastructure and facilities, not for private homes and businesses. It is not designed to reimburse you for damage to your home or anything like that. This is an applicant briefing for DR 4641. During this briefing, we will discuss FEMA's public assistance program. Among the things we're going to talk about is just an overview of the process, deadlines, eligibility, hazard mitigation, various things to make sure that everybody who's involved does have a basic understanding of the program. Everything that's done under the auspices of federal or state government does have governing authorities and documents that kind of control the program. This is a list of most of the program authorities and governing documents for the public assistance program. One of the most important ones to make note of is the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, version 4 of the PAPPG. The PAPPG, or Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, is a great document that takes the public assistance policy, puts it into one volume. It's not always easily digestible. It's still a guidance document, a policy document, but it's more digestible than the different chapters of the Code of Federal Regulation and the Stafford Act. This disaster will fall under the June 2020 version of the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide. That's version 4. Updates are noted on pages 12 through 16 for this version. Policy updates do get made from time to time between publishings of versions of the policy guide. Those are posted on FEMA.gov. Public assistance process is a process with several steps that are broken down into multiple phases. While there are several steps, that does not mean that it necessarily takes a very long time to get through it. It will take as much time for individual applicants to get through the process as it needs to, based on the complexity and size of the projects and that sort of thing that they're dealing with. We are already here in the earliest parts, the phase 1 operational planning and coordination. Right now we're conducting the applicant briefings, and we're going to be talking about the requests for public assistance, or RPAs. And then once those get submitted, then the eligibility reviews and recovery scoping meetings will take place. Ultimately, the goal of this process is to get to final closeout and final payout of the disaster and the cost associated with it. There are time limits for everything that is done through the government. There are time limits for what goes on. To apply for a public assistance grant, you have 30 days from the date of declaration. The request for public assistance, or RPA, is made by the applicant in Grants Portal. The due date for that is Friday, March 25th, 2022. Once you have an RPA, you will have a recovery scoping meeting, and that triggers another deadline that the applicant has to identify all incident-related damages within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting, and that's going to go on a damage inventory sheet also in FEMA's Grants Portal. That damage identification is very important. It needs to be done within that first 60 days following the recovery scoping meeting. If it is not identified within that regulatory time limits, it will not be eligible. This program does have eligibility concerns that are built into it. It's a nice pyramid of building blocks that starts with the applicant, then the facility, the work, and the cost. All those four things have to be eligible in order for an applicant or a subrecipient to receive funding. Initial eligibility is for the applicant. Applicants, potentially eligible applicants, would include government entities at the state, local, and tribal level. It's going to include potentially public utilities here in Nebraska. That would be things like public power districts. Here in Nebraska, it would also include natural resources districts. And it does include certain types of private nonprofit organizations that provide either critical or essential non-critical services. Houses of worship may be eligible as long as they provide services that are included in that critical or essential non-critical services. For-profit entities are not eligible applicants for FEMA Public Assistance Program, but they can be contractors for eligible work done for eligible applicants. There are certain rules and regulations that are associated with private nonprofits. Only certain private nonprofits can be eligible applicants. And there are certain things that a private nonprofit needs to do in order to demonstrate that eligibility. Among the information they need to provide is proof that they are a tax-exempt organization, either from the IRS or from the state of Nebraska or another state, as well as articles of incorporation or a charter or bylaws that explain what the organization does and for whom they do it. These documents will need to be uploaded to Grants Portal before getting an approval for the request for public assistance. There is a description of critical services and essential non-critical services in the PAPPG on pages 45 and 46, tables 1 and 2. That's a great reference for you. And that document can be downloaded off the internet. Just do a Google search for PAPPG version 4, and you should be able to find it without a problem. You can also get a copy of it through NEMA's website, and I'll show you where to find that here in just a minute. Once the applicant is determined to be eligible, the facility needs to be eligible. For a facility to be eligible, the facility are the buildings, work, systems, or equipment owned by an eligible applicant. For a facility to be eligible, it has to be damaged by the disaster, by the declared disaster. It must be the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant. One of the big sticking points is the facility must have been in active use at the time of the disaster. That does not mean that there had to be people inside a building that got damaged or people on a bridge that got taken out. It just means that it cannot have been a closed facility or a facility that's staged for demolition or decommissioning or something like that. Also, the facility must be in the designated disaster area in one of the 25 declared counties for this disaster. The FEMA does not provide funding to restore facilities if they're under the specific authority of another federal agency. And as projects are developed, those topics will be discussed with subrecipients. The work also needs to be eligible. For work to be eligible, it must be required as a result of the declared incident. Again, it located in the right area, be the legal responsibility of the applicant. Permanent work, which are category C through G, must restore the facility to its pre-disaster design, size, and capacity, and function in accordance with applicable codes and standards. Also, for work to be eligible, it must be reasonable, completed in a timely manner, and comply with all regulations. There are some potential concerns for work eligibility that do pop up from time to time. All work being done must comply with all of the federal, state, and local environmental and historic preservation laws, or EHP. That includes that the permits and permissions and concurrent statements need to be obtained, and that might mean communications with groups like the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, historic preservation offices, departments of natural resources. Failure to comply with environmental policies before starting work may lead to loss of funding. Similarly, damages that cannot be proven as being caused by the incident will be considered ineligible. That's why it's very important for potential applicants to keep maintenance records and inspection reports, because those types of things, including third-party sourced images and documents, are going to be used by FEMA to make determinations as to eligibility based on damage being caused by the particular incident. Other potential eligibility concerns for work is that the work being done has to be according to the FEMA approved and obligated scope of work for the project. Work completed outside of the approved scope of work may result in partial or complete deobligation of funds. Failure to complete the approved work may also result in a partial or complete deobligation of funds. If your plan is to do work other than what is in the FEMA approved scope of work, you must get approval from FEMA through NEMA before that work is started. Some potential ways to do this are through alternate projects and improved projects. If you find yourself in a situation like that, please reach out to somebody on our team, on the NEMA Public Assistance team, to work with you through that process. We want to make sure that the work you do is eligible for as much reimbursement as possible. We hate for any of our subrecipients to end up not being able to get as reimbursed as possible. The last eligibility level that needs to be met is cost eligibility. Cost eligibility means that the costs have to be directly tied to the performance of eligible work. All the costs have to be documented completely and adequately. Any costs are going to be reduced by credits like insurance, salvage values, that kind of thing. It's very important that any costs incurred are consistent with what the subrecipient or the applicant currently has in their internal policies and procedures. And those policies have to apply no matter what the source of funding is for those costs. It's also important that the work be necessary and reasonable to accomplish the work. Sometimes you might be able to get increase of costs for codes and standards upgrades. Codes and standards upgrades might, there might be a situation where a facility needs to be made bigger or changed in its scope or design in order to meet certain codes and standards. If that does apply, such upgrades would need to be run through the FEMA NEMA system to make sure that they're approved. For those costs to be eligible, whatever code or standard is trying to be met must be in effect before the disaster takes place. It must have been formally adopted, and it must be enforced and uniformly applied throughout that jurisdiction. It can't just be a code or standard that happens to pop up because there's federal funding that might be able to help pay for it. Another potential place for additional costs, additional work to be added to a project is through hazard mitigation. On the public assistance side, we talk about 406 mitigation. That's the section of the Stafford Act that this mitigation is discussed. Hazard mitigation, for those who don't know, is a sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to people and property from natural hazards and their effects. And we're going to talk about different types of hazard mitigation here in a little bit. But for 406 mitigation, the important thing is that the mitigation has to directly reduce the potential of future damage to a damaged portion of a facility. The mitigation measure can only be applied to damaged elements in the facility. Frequently, the cost that will be allowed would be at least an additional 15% of costs on most permanent work projects. On some permanent work projects, it can be an additional 100% of costs that can be eligible. The projects for those are still paid at the 75% federal share. Eligibility for hazard mitigation is frequently based on benefit cost ratio limits. Some examples might be head walls, adding head walls to a culvert, or upsizing or adding culverts or upgrading power poles. Those are all things that are done very frequently with 406 hazard mitigation funds. Another thing that has to be watched out for is the potential for duplication of benefits. FEMA is prohibited from duplicating benefits from other sources. That can result in a reduction of funding, partial or total deobligation of funding. Certain things that FEMA will not duplicate would be insurance proceeds, non-federal grants, earmarked cash donations, or other federal awards, as well as funding between FEMA programs. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of work. I mentioned a few minutes ago, permanent work projects, category C through G. So everything that's done through FEMA public assistance falls under a category of work. Emergency work categories are things that address an immediate threat, like removing debris and emergency protective measures. Permanent work is going to be restoration of facilities back to pre-disaster condition. Things like roads and bridges, water control facilities, even parks and recreational facilities can be categories of work. If we start with the category A, emergency work debris removal. Debris removal is eligible when it eliminates threats to life, health, and safety, or threats of significant damage to improved property. And it's important that it's improved property, not just a wooded area that nobody uses. The damage removal must ensure the economic recovery of the community, excuse me, and provide benefit for the community at large. For category A debris removal work, straight time and overtime labor are now eligible for reimbursement. For emergency protective measures, category B emergency work, those are actions that are taken before, during, and immediately following a disaster to save lives, protect public health and safety, or eliminate immediate threat of significant damage to improve public and private property. For category B work, only overtime labor is eligible for a budgeted employee. If the employees are unbudgeted performing category B work, straight time and overtime labor are eligible. Those unbudgeted employees would include things like reassigned employees, employees funded from an external source, or backfill employees. There's a lot of information about that in the PAPPG on pages 69 through 72 to talk about work labor eligibility. Here's a quick chart that kind of looks at what cost would be eligible and what cost would not be eligible for emergency work labor. This chart can be found on page 70 of the PAPPG. Sometimes, frequently here, especially in a state like Nebraska, we will get volunteers who show up to help do some cleanup work or do some work immediately after an incident happens. If people show up to volunteer or donate resources, equipment, supplies, materials, that kind of thing to help with response activities, FEMA it is possible that FEMA could write a category B donated resources project. That's going to be based its own separate project from the other emergency work projects. And it will be one of the last things that's obligated as far as the emergency work projects. In order to take advantage of this, volunteer labor must be very well documented to include the name, the hours worked, the work site location, and description of work for each volunteer. Similarly, if there are equipment and materials that are donated, those would also need to be well documented. Donated resources, emergency work projects may be used to offset the non-federal cost share of other eligible emergency work category A and B projects. This can be a helpful thing to help reduce the burden on the local entity. So category C through G are our permanent work categories. Applicants may claim reimbursement for eligible costs incurred while performing eligible permanent work including force account labor. That's the cost it is for the people that are employed by the applicant or the subrecipient. And their costs include not just their hourly pay rates, but also any associated benefits for the applicant, for the employees, and for straight time and for overtime. Similarly, you can be reimbursed for the equipment. If there's equipment that's owned by the applicant, the cost to operate equipment can be reimbursed. The cost of materials used in the repair or replacement of an eligible facility can be reimbursed, as can contract labor and rented equipment. All of those costs can be reimbursed for the subrecipient. There are time limits for all the work to be done. Time limits for project completion, they start on the date of declaration, which for this disaster was February 23rd. Emergency work projects, that's categories A and B projects, must be completed within 6 months. That would be August 23rd of 2022. Permanent work must be completed within 18 months. That will be August 23rd of 2023. We know that sometimes there are extenuating circumstances that make it so that the work may not be able to be done on time. If that's the case, for emergency work, deadlines may be extended for an additional 6 months. For permanent work, they may be extended for an additional 30 months. In order to get a time extension from the state or from FEMA, that request must be in the form of a letter on your organization's letterhead and must include certain information. The bulk of that information is basically, where are you with the project now? What's been the holdup? What's your plan for moving forward? And when do you think you'll have it done? We don't automatically grant time extensions. We do review the request and make sure that things are working in the right direction so that we can keep tabs on what's going on and make sure that deadlines are being met. So we talked about how things need to be adequately documented. That's one of the big lifts for this program. Applicants are required to maintain project files containing all necessary backup information for the costs that they are claiming for reimbursement. Something that's important, pictures, very good to have taken before, during, and after cleanup or repair. File retention, at least 5 years for the state of Nebraska. If your jurisdiction requires a longer time frame, then you must keep it for whatever the longest time frame you're subject to. And we ask that when you do submit your documentation to us, you keep it separated by project, and you never ever send us an original. Only if you're going to send us anything or hand anything over to your state people here at NEMA or to FEMA representatives, please only give copies, don't give originals. Required documentation for all projects will include your force account labor summary sheet, your equipment summary sheets, your material summary sheets, your contract and rented equipment summary sheets, and any and all documentation supporting those summary sheets, as well as proof of payment. On our website, we do have drafts of summary sheets that you are free to download and use. You are not required by any means to use the summary sheets that we provide, but we do need to have summary sheets for each of those things so that we know what we're looking at. Cost summary roll-up sheet is going to be a breakdown of the totals from each category: force account labor, for straight time, overtime, equipment costs, materials, all those different things. Your force account labor summary sheet needs to be followed by copies of timesheets used to fill in that summary sheet, as well as activity logs for what those people were doing. Your force account labor, FEMA refers to the applicant's personnel as force account. FEMA will reimburse force account labor based on actual hourly rates plus the cost of the employee's fringe benefits. FEMA calculates those benefits based on a percentage of the hourly pay rate. And of course, certain items in a benefits package are not dependent on hours worked, and others are. So your fringe benefit for overtime is typically going to be different from your straight time benefit package. Fringe benefits include things like holiday leave, sick leave, vacation time, Social Security, Medicare, insurance, all those different things that go into the additional costs of labor are part of that force account labor fringe benefit calculation. Similarly, you may use your own equipment or equipment that your agency owns to do the work. If you are using that, then that's what we refer to as force account equipment. We ask that you have a completed summary sheet with copies of the documents used to complete that behind it. The summary sheet documentation, support documentation that we're going to want is going to be equipment logs that should tell us who was using the equipment, when they were using it, what they were doing with it. And similarly, we want to make sure we're going to check and make sure that we have timesheets with your force account labor documentation to match the people who are using the equipment. So FEMA only applies equipment rates, equipment usage to the time an applicant is operating the equipment. Costs to mobilize the equipment to a project site are eligible. Frequently, costs for standby time are not, unless the equipment operator is using the equipment intermittently for more than half of the working hours for a given day. In that case, standby time could be eligible, but that's done on a case-by-case basis. The rates that FEMA does provide some rates for the use of equipment. Those are available on our website. You can also do a Google search for them. We have new rates for disasters declared on or after September 15th, 2021. The rates on that equipment are for applicant-owned equipment in good condition, have all the required attachments. The equipment rates are comprehensive, which means they include the associated costs for using the equipment, not just the use of the equipment, but also the fuel and the maintenance that go into it. So you're not going to be able to bill also for fuel costs or oil or things like that. And like I said, we have links to this on NEMA's website. If you use materials, there is a material summary sheet that we ask that is filled out, and we ask that you include copies of the invoices for materials purchased, as well as a proof of payment for the materials purchased for the projects in order to complete the summary. For materials or supplies, the cost of supplies will be eligible if it's purchased and needed to effectively respond to or recover from the incident, or it's taken from the applicant's stock and used for the incident. If something's taken from the stock, we ask that you track that information with whatever inventory records you keep and usage records. FEMA will provide funding for these items based on invoices if they're available. If the invoices are not available for items used from stock, FEMA will provide PA funding based on their properly documented established method of pricing delivery. Basically, it's whatever it costs to initially purchase the materials or whatever it will cost to replace the materials. But you need to document that thoroughly and adequately. If you're going to use contract labor, there is a contract summary sheet, and we ask that all the contract information be included with that, to include not just invoices, but a signed copy of the contract, the bid notice, the bid tabulations, the procurement policies, everything that went into procuring that contract needs to be provided, because all those things are very important to ensure following all the federal rules. Contracts are a big deal with FEMA and public assistance, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about procurement a little bit, but FEMA will reimburse costs using 3 types of properly procured contract payment obligations. The first one, the most well-liked, is the fixed price option. Cost reimbursement is also a usually acceptable payment obligation. And to a very limited extent, and frequently in only emergency situations, will be a time and materials contract. The reason time and materials contracts aren't usually approved is because with a time and materials contract, there's very little incentive for the contractor to do the work in a quick or efficient manner. FEMA will not reimburse costs if the contract is what they call a cost plus percentage of cost contract, or a contract with a percentage of construction cost method, because those have no incentive for the contractor to work in an efficient manner. And FEMA similarly won't reimburse costs if it's a lump sum contract that has both eligible and non-eligible work in it, because it becomes difficult to separate what is eligible and what is not eligible from that work, through that contract and invoices. We are going to talk about procurement here in just another few minutes. If you rent equipment, because not every agency or organization owns every piece of equipment they might need to use, if you rent equipment, then you can be reimbursed for that rental equipment. We ask that you fill out a summary sheet as well, again, and send in and give us all the information for the invoices and rental agreements used to fill out that information. We also want to know what kind of procurement method you use to demonstrate that how you made that decision to use that supplier, and why you decided that you needed to rent that equipment. For disaster 4641, there are thresholds for large and small projects. The minimum project threshold is $3,500. The large project threshold is $139,800. So anything between that minimum project threshold and large project threshold is called a small project. Those are written, and the federal share is paid based on how the project is written. So if it's written on estimates, it's going to be paid out based on those estimates. The federal share will be. Large projects are frequently written based on estimates, but are paid out and closed based on the actual costs, with the exception of certain capped projects. But anything over that $139,800 is typically going to be paid out based on the actual costs, not based on the estimate when written. So small projects, like I said, are projects written for any amount less than that $139,800. And I put this on here to kind of show how we do things with small projects. If there's an estimated project that's a $100,000 project, then the Fed share for that would be $75,000. For most eligible applicants, the state will cost share up to 50% of the non-federal share. So we'll split the non-federal share of $25,000 half and half with the local. $12,500 and $12,500 each. If we take that same project written at $100,000, but the work is done for only $90,000, the subrecipient will still receive the $75,000 federal share. But because the non-federal share is only $15,000 of the actual costs, the state will split that $15,000 difference with the local entity to $7,500 each, state and local. If we have another project that's written at $100,000, but it ultimately costs the subrecipient $120,000 to do the work, the federal share is still capped at $75,000. It's still capped at that 75% of what the project was obligated for. The state's maximum payout is still only going to be $12,500 for the state share, because our state cost share is only up to 50% of the obligated project non-federal share. $32,500 is the difference that's going to be on the locals for that one, which is why it's very important when you're working with your program delivery manager and helping to develop these projects. It's very important that you work closely with them and ensure that they're picking up all the potential costs that may be there. So I told you we were going to talk about procurement and contracting. We've got the next several slides are all about this. It's not really exciting stuff to talk about, but it's very important because procurement is one of the issues where auditors find the most problems. For proper procurement, the applicant or the subrecipient must comply with all the federal procurement standards, That's a condition of PA funding receiving. The federal procurement standards for state and territorial governments are different than those for tribal and state and local governments and private nonprofits. For state and territorial government agencies, have to follow the same policies and procedures they would use for procurements with non-federal funds, have to comply with 2 CFR section 200.322, and ensure that every purchase order or contract includes the clauses that are required by 2 CFR 200.326. That is in one of the appendices, Appendix K of the PAPPG version 4. Non-state applicants must use their own documented procurement processes and procedures that reflect all applicable state, territorial, tribal, and local government laws and regulations, provided that the procurements conform to applicable federal laws and standards. That's a lot, and procurement is a very big thing to work on. So some of the federal standards that must apply to procurement done in for public assistance funding. They must provide full and open competition. All necessary affirmative steps must be conducted to ensure the use of minority businesses and women business enterprises and labor surplus area firms. And there's an example of what that means. Procurement, for it to be satisfactory, you can't be using the same contractor who developed and drafted the bid docs to bid on those docs. They can't bid on the same thing that they created. That will create a potentially an unfair competitive advantage. And one of the most important things is this number 5 is to maintain records sufficient to detail the history of the procurement. So if you are doing any contracting, there is the possibility that you might run into issues with getting enough response to bids or to bid requests, or getting enough information in, or you can't find what you're looking for, and so you have to go to plan B, if you will. The important thing is that you must document everything that's gone on. So you need to document why you chose this particular method of procurement, why you chose this type of contract, why you chose this particular contractor, and how you came to the determination that the contract price is reasonable. It's very important that those things are documented, because those questions are going to be asked as the project is being closed out, and inadequate responses to some of those questions may result in loss of eligible funding. There are different types of procurement, different types of purchasing methods. Micro purchase is the smallest level. There's a $10,000 federal limit. There's a state limit as well. We're working on getting clarification on, and we'll put that out to our sub-recipients once we are sure we have the right information. For a micro purchase, it only requires one quote if it's a reasonable price, but you need to distribute those purchases equitably among potential vendors. You can't keep going to the same vendor over and over again with micro purchases, because that's going to look like you're trying to get around other more stringent purchasing procedures. The next step up is a small purchase procedure, which requires a number of quotes from an adequate number of qualified sources. Adequate number is one of those things that's not necessarily defined very well in the Code of Federal Regulation. For some people, that means 3 or 4. Again, if you're not able to get a number of qualified sources, you need to document that and make that part of your procurement documentation. So for larger projects, for construction contracts, especially sealed bidding is the preferred method. That would end up in a firm fixed price contract being awarded to the lowest priced, responsive, and responsible bidder. It's very important that price is considered in this, but also whether the bidder and the contractor are responsive and responsible. It's one thing to come up with a low price. It's another thing to come up with a low price and be able to actually do the work. Non-state applicants must use an adequate number of suppliers to solicit bids from. And again, that number is not clearly defined. It's important that the invitation for bids be publicly advertised, that all the bid information be done in the open, that bids are open publicly, and that the tabulation is done in a way that's fair and open to everybody. Sometimes conditions are not appropriate for sealed bidding. If that's the case, then you can always use a competitive proposal process. Again, we're looking for a fixed price or a cost reimbursement contract awarded to a responsible firm whose proposal is most advantageous to the non-state applicant. And that's typically going to be somebody who gives the best price, in addition to being sure that they can actually do the job that's being requested. Non-state applicants must publicize their requests for proposals or RFPs, and they must solicit those proposals from an adequate number of qualified sources. In the request for proposal that gets sent out, all the evaluation factors need to be identified, as well as their relative importance, so that everybody has a fair shake. Sometimes you run into a situation where you just can't get competitive proposals. In situations like that, FEMA may reimburse those costs, but only when certain situations apply. And the rationale and reasoning for that exemption is documented well. Sometimes the item or service can only be available from a single source. The public exigency or emergency for the requirement will not permit a delay resulting from competitive solicitation. And the next slide talks about what exigency and emergency means in these situations. The FEMA or the recipient will expressly authorize a non-competitive proposal, and I will tell you that we just don't do that. NEMA will not do that. Or number 4, which happens quite a bit, is after solicitation of a number of sources, there's no adequate competition. If you are trying to use, or if you're going to use one of these reasons for going with a non-competitive proposal, it must be thoroughly documented. Talk about exigent or emergency circumstances. An exigency is when there is a need to avoid, prevent, or alleviate serious harm or injury, financial or otherwise, to the non-state entity, and the use of competitive procurement proposals would prevent the urgent action required to address the situation. And an emergency is when there is a threat to life, public health, or safety, or improved property that requires immediate action. Emergency conditions are normally short-lived. Exigent circumstances may go on for weeks or months, depending on the situation. But the important thing is that as soon as possible, regular bidding, regular procurement procedures take place. You can't, an exigent circumstance or an emergency circumstance is not going to last, for very long, typically. There is a FEMA fact sheet for more details. We have a link to it on the NEMA website, and we'll be happy to forward that to you. If you need that, you can always reach out to somebody on my team, and we'll get all that information to you. So frequent sources of non-compliance when it comes to procurement include things like using time and materials contracts or cost plus percentage of cost contracts. Another thing to watch out for is geographic preferences. Your bid docs cannot specify that the company that you hire is in a certain place. It can require that they have licenses to work in certain states. You can require that they're a Nebraska licensed company. You can't require that they are a Nebraska based or owned company. Also watch out for suspended or debarred contractors, and you can check for those at sam.gov. those are contractors who the federal government has determined just aren't good at doing federal contracting. Failure to comply with proper procurement procedures, and this is very important, will result in a loss of some or all of the funding associated with the services and or materials purchased. If you do not use proper procurement methods, you will lose funding for your project. We can't, in a conversation like this, cover all procurement guidelines. We ask that you do your research, reach out to your if your entity, if your county, city, organization has a contracted attorney, please reach out to them. Nobody on the NEMA team is an expert in procurement. None of us are. We have not learned enough about it to consider ourselves experts, and we don't want to steer you the wrong way. You can find additional resources on FEMA.gov. Just search for PDAT, P-D-A-T, and that gets you to a lot of good procurement information. Similarly, the state of Nebraska is going to be hosting some virtual training for procurement and disasters, and as soon as we have those on the books, we'll get that information out so that people who are interested can be part of that and learn from FEMA's Office of Chief Counsel people. They're the FEMA attorneys on procurement. There are some special considerations that could impact the scope of work and funding of a project. Things like flood insurance. If it's a flooding project, a flooding disaster, flood insurance is a big consideration, as well as just insurance overall. Floodplain management, hazard mitigation. Big things are environmental preservation, historic preservation. If you plan on changing any of the work, any of the scope of work, if you're planning on doing anything outside of the obligated approved scope of work, please contact NEMA prior to starting that work, or you risk the loss of funding for that project. And any of these special considerations could lead to a loss of funding. Insurance reductions. I'm not sure how much insurance is going to be play a role in most of the recovery with this disaster. But the long and short of it is that insurance will be reduced, or the project cost will be reduced by certain amounts for insurance that it does exist. Or if it's in a flood situation, if it could have been insured under NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, whether or not the facility is insured, there will be a reduction of funding for that facility. Similarly, some things moving forward may have an insurance obtain and maintain requirement on a facility. That means that FEMA is helping pay for repairs now, but will only do so on the condition that the facility gets insured moving forward. Failure to obtain and maintain that insurance may result in denial or deobligation of funding related to noncompliance. Another compliance issue that we need to make sure everybody stays on board with is the quarterly reporting. It is a condition of the public assistance grant through the state of Nebraska. We will send out quarterly reports to subrecipients that have projects open. Standard lane projects are on every report until the applicant is closed. Completed quarterly reports must be submitted to ensure proper payment as well as proper project deadlines are being met. Failure to complete and submit these quarterly reports in a timely manner may jeopardize your funding. This is what the quarterly one version of quarterly reports that we send out. We'll send it out. We ask that you fill in how much of the work is completed, when you think you'll be done, if you need a time extension, if the work is already completed, what was the date that it was completed. We'd like to know how much you've spent on that project already, and if there's a cost overrun. It's important that we do that so that we can make sure that time extensions get handled correctly, and we make sure that we stay on top of all our communication with our subrecipients. In the past, I don't know, about 3 years ago and before, you would get your direct administrative costs, or DAC, attached to each individual project. For the past few years and moving forward, there will be a management cost project for our subrecipients, subgrantees. Those management costs will include indirect and direct costs and other administrative expenses. It will be on a single Category Z project for each applicant. It will be closed and paid on actual expenses up to 5% of the total eligible project costs. It gets paid under actual expenses. It's not just here's 5%. It means that we have to get the actual cost and actual information for those costs who are managing the disaster. Under current policy, volunteer work cannot be used to claim management costs. Unfortunately, there's no donated resources policy right now for management costs. Category Z projects are subject to the same validation requirements as all other projects, and the management cost project worksheet is paid with a 100% federal share. I mentioned that it gets fully validated. The documentation requirements are the same as they are for any other project in terms of the force account labor and documentation like that. But in addition to all that information, we also will need work logs with an explanation of the work performed, with a sample of daily logs and activity reports. If Category Z costs are going to be used for office supplies or equipment or office space, we need that documentation. If there are going to be meetings or site inspections, we need documentation and activity logs for that. If there's travel costs or training costs, we need to have everything to support that and how it's connected to eligible projects. And then recipients and subrecipients will need to certify that the management activities and associated costs are eligible, consistent with policy, and not associated with ineligible projects. So for most of our subrecipients, you're already in Grants Portal. For those of you who don't know what Grants Portal is, it's a web-based tool through which all the FEMA project documentation and determinations will flow. It's a great place to help improve transparency and visibility. It's a place where projects, documentation, and information can be tracked 24/7. It's where you'll upload documentation even before disaster hits, things like your pay policies, insurance, procurement policies, equipment inventory lists. Each applicant organization can have multiple users, and each user may have different roles and rights. It starts out with creating the initial applicant account. All applicant organizations are required to have an account. It's not an option anymore. There's no non-Grants Portal method. If you already have an account, you do not need to create a new one for each disaster. If you're not sure if your agency already has an account, please reach out to my team. Please reach out to NEMA's public assistance team and check with us, because there's a feature now on Grants Portal that allows potential applicant agencies to create their own account. We ask that you work with us at NEMA before doing that, so we can make sure it's done properly. Make sure that you're using the correct naming and all that information. Any email for Grants Portal will come from support.pagrants@fema.gov. Initially, those are going to fly to your junk or spam folder, so please check there if you're expecting anything from Grants Portal. Once you have that account set up, you're going to need to submit what they call a request for public assistance, or an RPA. The request for public assistance is basically a subrecipient or an applicant organization saying that they want to participate and get reimbursement through the public assistance program. It does not commit the subrecipient or the applicant to doing anything. If the applicant gets to a point where they don't want to proceed any further, they are not required to do so. This does not lock you into anything. However, if you do not get an RPA completed and submitted electronically through Grants Portal within 30 days of the date of declaration, you do not have the opportunity to participate in public assistance. You will forego that. So we ask that you, if there's a chance that you want to participate in PA, please submit the request for public assistance. Public assistance program delivery model has 4 phases with FEMA. Breaking the model up into phases allows for transparency and a better ability to track the grants. We're right now in that phase 1, early phase 1 process. Once you get your RPA submitted and have your recovery scoping meeting, that's when you'll jump into that phase 2, where the disaster-related damages and eligibility determinations will take place. As we go through the different phases, you'll have meetings with your program delivery managers, have meetings with us at NEMA, and we'll all work through them together. So we talked about a program delivery manager, or PDMG. If you haven't been involved in a FEMA disaster in the past few years, you might not know what a PDMG is. They're the primary FEMA point of contact for applicants. They work really closely with the state recovery staff, with our state PA team. We have a great relationship with FEMA Public Assistance here in the field. Each program delivery manager is assigned 5 to 7 applicants. It might be a few more depending on how big the disaster is and what type of disaster it is. They get assigned to each applicant after the request for public assistance is approved by FEMA. For this disaster, they're going to work out of a joint field office, but most of it's going to be in a virtual environment. Their responsibilities, the most important ones are to conduct meetings, help upload documentation to the Grants Portal, and be that coordination between FEMA staff, state staff, and the applicant. They're going to be your person to work with for the FEMA side of project development for the first part of the disaster recovery. One of the first things that you'll do with your program delivery manager is called an exploratory call. It's supposed to happen within 7 days of the applicant being assigned to the PDMG. It's when the PDMG introduces themselves to the applicant, talk about the damages, talk about what documentation is going to be needed for the recovery scoping meeting, and then they'll work with you to schedule that recovery scoping meeting. The recovery scoping meeting is really important. As you're getting ready to schedule it, as you're working with the PDMG to schedule it, do your best to make sure that the people who are in that meeting, who are available for that meeting, are the ones who understand the needs of the damaged facilities. Not everybody's going to know everything about every facility that got damaged, so you might need to loop in 3 or 4 people, and that's fine. It's better to have the people in the room or on the call who know what's going on than to exclude them. So the recovery scoping meeting is supposed to happen within 21 days of applicant assignment to the PDMG. The recovery scoping meeting is designed to be a first formal in-person meeting between the PDMG and applicant, and frequently we're going to work to get some state people either to call in or to be at the meeting in person. That's when there'll be discussion of the damages, discussion of need for site inspections. They're going to talk about environmental historic preservation potential issues, mitigation issues. They're going to talk about how to keep track, how to use the damage inventory spreadsheet to document the damages. They're going to set a schedule for when they're going to have their meetings with you. And most importantly, that's when the 60-day clock for damage identification starts. Damages must be identified within that first 60 days after the recovery scoping meeting, or else they may not be eligible for inclusion in projects. Site inspections may be needed. If there's work that's not complete at the time of the recovery scoping meeting, the PDMG is going to schedule the site inspections. Site inspectors, and I think with this disaster, it's probably going to be the PDMG who's doing the site inspecting. They're going to schedule an appointment to meet with you, meet with the applicant, If they need to, go out into the field to take pictures of what's damaged, get location information, get dimension information. There'll be a report of that damage created from the site inspection, and that report will be reviewed and approved by the program delivery manager and by the applicant. We're also going to be working through what they call a Consolidated Resource Center, or a CRC. CRC is a full-time project writing staff to take the information received in the field from site inspections or from damage inventories and create projects through those. Eligibility reviews take place at the CRC. Once the people at the CRC are done creating the project, the applicant will get a chance to review and sign off on the projects after development validation there. Once projects are done, we move into what we call the closeout phase. The key objective for the closeout phase is to complete the work, move the project to FEMA closeout, and make final payments to the applicant. The things that we're going to be doing during the closeout phase is the applicant will complete the eligible work according to the FEMA approved and obligated project worksheet. If the scope of work needs to be changed, the applicant must work with NEMA staff to receive FEMA approval prior to commencing work. Once the work is completed, the applicant notifies NEMA, gives us all the documentation to summarize and support the costs incurred, and to demonstrate compliance with all the conditions of the grant. Our staff will validate that documentation, work with the applicant to make sure that we have everything. Once it's been validated, we'll get concurrence from the applicant. We'll put a closeout package together for FEMA. We'll come out, we'll inspect projects, we'll inspect the work to make sure that it was done according to the scope of work. And our goal is to get this done quickly and completely, and to get it done in a way where there are no issues. At several points along the process, and this is very important, at several points along the process, the applicant is asked to sign documents for approval, typically on the grants portal platform. After a site inspection, if that's needed, the applicant has the opportunity to review and sign the site inspection report. After the DDD, or the damage description and dimensions report, is completed, the applicant has an opportunity to review that and sign it and move it forward. After the project is written and a scope of work and cost are developed, the applicant also has an opportunity to review that information, sign the document to move it forward. Whenever there's an opportunity to sign and approve something, there's also the opportunity to send it back for review and correction if you disagree. If something is presented to you for signature and doesn't look right, make sure you ask the questions. Ask your PDMG the questions that you have. Make sure you understand the answers. Make sure you agree with it. Make sure that everything that's in that report or in that project that you're signing to move forward is the way it needs to be before you sign it and move it forward. If you feel like you are being pressured to sign something just to move it forward, please reach out to us at NEMA before you sign it. Especially if you hear from anybody involved the phrase we hate so much, the "we'll fix it at closeout." If you hear that and they pressure you to sign something and move it forward, please reach out to somebody at NEMA before you sign it, and let us work with the program delivery manager and their leadership to make sure that we're all on the same page with what's going on. It's very important that anytime there's something for you to sign, anytime there's something for you to click on for approval in Grants Portal, that you read it closely and make sure you understand it and agree with it before you send it forward. So what we need on the public assistance side right now is, if you don't have a Grants Portal account created, please talk with one of the NEMA staff to help get that going. If you have an account in Grants Portal, work with us to submit the request for public assistance. We'll be happy to help you with that. Or you can just log into Grants Portal and you'll have a prompt to submit a request for public assistance. So when we do in-person applicant briefings, we have a red folder that we hand out to everybody. Since we're doing this in the virtual environment, we can't hand you the red folder, but we do have on our website the state forms for this disaster. We ask that you go to neba.nebraska.gov /recovery/public assistance, and you can find those there, or you can just reach out to somebody on my team and we'll email them to you. NEMA will not process payments without receiving all the state forms from your entity. So until we have all those state forms, we're not going to be able to make a payment. So we also want to talk about hazard mitigation grant funding and hazard mitigation grant program. I believe John Gassman is going to take that. John, just let me know when you need me to click slides, and I'll do that for you.
Very good. Thanks so much, Patrick. We can go and get started. All right, I'm going to talk to you about the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This is a post-disaster grant that becomes available after a federally declared disaster. It is authorized under Section 404 of the Stafford Act. So you heard earlier, Patrick was referring to 406 mitigation. Of course, it falls under Section 406 of the Stafford Act. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is under Section 404. A couple of important notes about HMGP. It is available statewide, not just in the impacted areas. It has a 75% federal share, 25% local share. And unlike public assistance, there is no state level assistance for that local share. If you are interested in a mitigation project, the first step is to complete a notice of interest form, which you can find on our website. You can go to neba.nebraska.gov under agency units, look for hazard mitigation, and right there at the top you should see an NOI form. Open that. It's a Word document. You can download it, fill it out, and send it in to us. The process works. Once we get those in, we will screen them for eligibility and for alignment with the goals from the state hazard mitigation plan. Once we screen them, we will put them in front of the Governor's Task Force for Disaster Recovery, which is a cross-agency organization. And they review all of the projects for best fit to make sure that this is the program that we want to fund this, and then also if there are any opportunities to help with that local share. All right, next please. All right, so for eligibility, in order for you to be eligible to receive HMGP funds, you have to be a government entity. That includes state and local agencies, regions, districts, cities, and towns. This also includes schools, school districts. There are certain private nonprofit organizations, some medical and residential care facilities or emergency facilities, and federally recognized tribes. A note about tribal entities, they may deal directly with FEMA and have their own disaster declaration, or they can be so they would be a recipient in that case, or they could be a subrecipient under the state. You have to have adopted a local hazard mitigation plan and participated in that planning process. Also upfront, you have to be able to cover the 25% local cost share. And then we also have to show that the project is cost effective. This is one of the first things that FEMA checks for in the hazard mitigation assistance grants. What the benefit cost ratio is that it shows that the benefits realized are at least equal to the cost of the project. Really, we want to see that the benefits will outweigh the cost, but they have to at least be a 1-to-1 ratio. Next, please. So here's some examples of eligible projects. Again, the HMGP is not limited to only the area that was impacted by this declared disaster. It's also not limited to the type of hazard that was encountered. So we can use the HMGP to address any hazards that your community may have anywhere in the state. So some examples, like I said, property acquisitions, demolitions, or relocations. This is to move folks out of the special flood hazard area. Flood proofing of public facilities, which could include installing flood vents or retrofits like that. Structural retrofits, which are really wind related. Minor flood control, such as culvert upsizing. Bank stabilizations for creeks and stream beds. warning systems such as sirens or weather radios for rural communities, generators to support critical facilities, utility retrofits, safe rooms for tornadoes, wildfire mitigation to include fuel reduction and increasing standoff between populated areas and woodland areas, planning projects, and post-disaster code enforcement. One note on the last one here, as Patrick mentioned earlier, there are eligible costs for the increased costs of compliance if you have to bring a structure into compliance. Under HMGP, if you find that you've had a problem with your building codes or they are falling short and that has resulted in additional damage, and you need assistance with enforcing your existing codes or in adopting new codes, the latest codes, those projects are also eligible under HMGP. Next, please. All right. I think that's all we really have. Again, the first step for hazard mitigation is go to our website, pull down a notice of interest. The notice of interest just gives us the initial information about the project and helps us to make an informed decision about whether that project should move to application. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Patrick.
Right on. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Okay, so we made it through this. Our recovery team, this is our current org chart-ish. There's a couple of things I need to fix on it. But this is who we are now. This is all of our contact information. That is available through the NEMA website, and we're more than happy to put that out to you. Probably the best way to get in touch with the public assistance team is through our public assistance email box, nema.publicassistance@nebraska.gov. That is monitored all day and has a better chance of getting a response quickly than trying to get an email to somebody directly. So I want to thank you for your time, for your attention, and open the floor up for questions if anybody has any. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close this meeting. I do appreciate your time. I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Look forward to seeing requests for public assistance come in. Again, if you have any questions, need any help with that, please reach out to my team here on the public assistance team, nema.publicassistance@nebraska.gov, or you can reach out to us directly. Thank you and have a great day.